What's up, family? Welcome to Mini-bytes Session 6. Playing the victim is the theme of the day. And before I get into that, I just want to share what I had for dinner tonight. We talked about nourishment and learning about what our bodies enjoy and what gives the body more energy versus less energy. And tonight I had, it was a mixture of cabbage, spaghetti squash, red onion, garlic, red and yellow peppers, and soy chorizo from Trader Joe's. I haven't eaten meat in almost 3.5 years, and I miss chorizo tremendously. And I've come across this product, and it is magnificent, and I include it in as many meals as possible. So also almond shredded cheese on top, and I love cheese. I got to mix it up a little bit more, listening to my body, what my body likes, how foods impact my energy and my digestion. Cheese is something that I have less of these days. So feeling well fed, well nourished, and excited to just share a little bit on the topic of what it has meant to me to play the victim and how that has shown up in my life, and the consequences of me choosing to tell myself a story that I'm playing the victim. So an example I will give of where I felt like a victim is I was promoted into a role with one of the companies I worked at that was a stretch role, without a doubt, and it turned out to be a bit of a catastrophe in certain ways, and it was also one of the greatest learning experiences, and I'll touch on that in a few moments. But this role, I lacked experience going into it, which wasn't the first time. There was also not really structure in place to support more of a hands-on approach with me during my onboarding as a leader in that role. And that being said, ultimately, I was asked to leave that role. And for a period of time, up until very recently, although I always acknowledged and was supportive of the fact that everyone did the best they could in that role, I still held feelings of resentment and anger toward my supervisors and toward my team for not being more supportive. I held resentment toward some of the women on my team that reported to me for not being more supportive and understanding of my learning curve. And at the same time, I also had to work through self-forgiveness for how I acted in the role, my tendencies in the role. And so for me, one area where I've been able to do some healing is in the area of recognizing that I was not in fact a victim, and in fact I was, as the cliche goes, or the saying goes, the victor. What happens when we decide to tell ourselves a story that we are playing the victim or that we are being victimized? I've noticed three, you can call them outcomes, or you could call them consequences, or perhaps just observations. What happens when I choose to call myself the victim in a particular set of circumstances? Number one, what ends up usually happening is a level of guilt, because I recognize that if I'm going to call myself the victim, then I must call the offenders, so to speak, victims as well, because it turns out we're all doing the best we can. And I cannot take credit for this notion or this theory, because the first time I heard it, read it, was a book by a woman named Louise Hay, and she talked about this, and she said, if you're going to call yourself a victim, then you must also call yourself the victim of a victim. And I've seen that play out in my own life experience. So that's kind of one observation. If I choose to call myself a victim, then I must call myself the victim of victims. Number two, when I choose to call myself a victim, I lose the benefit or the gain of that experience. So it almost nullifies or kind of voids out or maybe silences some of the benefits and some of the rewards of perhaps what was a challenging experience. So for example, my job story that I shared, there was so much that I gained from that experience. In fact, I could say I learned the most in that role of my entire career. But it took me moving through the stories around being the victim to arrive at that reward. And until I got through the stories of being a victim and moved through that, I really wasn't able to fully recognize the reward of that experience. The third observation or I guess sort of consequence of telling myself that I am the victim in a given situation is that it becomes my reality. So what happened with that job situation is that I moved into another role that it became a little bit easier for me to tell myself that I was a victim in that role. And the role was a much simpler role and really didn't require much support, but it became easier for me to find places in that role where I felt almost victimized. And it's an energetic thing, right? Because I was telling myself I had been victimized in a certain way, and that was actually showing up in my environment. So I learned that if I choose to call myself a victim in a particular set of circumstances, that there's a good chance that I'm going to be given opportunities to practice or to observe myself as a victim in another set of circumstances. And I think the reason for that is because I'm being given the opportunity to practice not being the victim. And I'm being given circumstances to remind myself that I'm, in fact, not the victim, because deep down, I don't want to be a victim. Deep down, I recognize my strength and my fortitude, and I know it's there. But sometimes life circumstances, and I am human, have me thinking that I'm the victim. So I will wrap today's time up with, if I choose to call myself the victim, I also must call myself the victim of a victim. I must also be prepared to not reap the rewards of any given circumstance I've experienced. And finally, I must be prepared to have a circumstance or circumstances manifest in my reality that remind me to practice that I am not a victim or have me feeling like I've been victimized. So thank you all. I love you all. And if you would like to learn more about the Trifecta Core Health Initiative, which is the work that I do, or my personal coaching, you can visit our website at www.emc2nolimits.com. You can also email me directly at emac@emc2nolimits.com. Thank you.